So in this video, I'm going to do kind of a direct follow-up to my previous video, which was about some tests you can put yourself through. 2-3-step tests to kind of see whether you're a good or a bad or a difficult bike fit. And so I'll put a link up here to that video. If you haven't seen that, I'll also put one in the description. So if you haven't seen that one, go check that out right now and then come back to this one. So now that you've done the test, now we have to do something with this information. Now I did an old video, and I will link that again up here and down below, where we would look at your existing bike or your old bike, and we would make some judgments based on how that's set up to kind of help you determine what the next bike needed to look like, what the new bike should look like. So for example, if you have an 80 millimeter stem with 25 degrees of rise on it and 35 millimeters of spacers underneath the stem, then you might look at the next bike at making sure that the head tube is a little bit longer, so that you can still attain this bar height without having to go to some of these extremes. So I want to clear up a couple things. First, it's not impossible, but it's less common, significantly less common, that cyclists will really struggle to try and make their bike more aggressive, or that they'll struggle to try and get their bars, further out or lower, in a more dynamic or more aggressive position. This is because generally for the past 60, 70 years, bikes have been built from this standpoint already. They've been built from a racing standpoint already. So it's no big trick usually to get bikes to make them more aggressive. If since the 20s bikes were built with a very relaxed, very upright geometry for some reason, and that's the way they always were, then perhaps we would see that more often where people were really struggling to get their bars low enough. And only recently have we seen some of the geometry start to change a little bit and inch upwards into more, what they call relaxed or endurance kind of road geometry. And this has definitely helped a lot more people fit onto their bikes, but it doesn't solve the problem for everybody. I mention all this about why it's pretty easy to make bikes more aggressive, because what this comes down to is when people are struggling with their fit and when they are struggling to figure out what the next bike is, and they're in between sizes, as I've mentioned many times in the past. Generally, people are trying to make their effective top tube of their bike shorter or the head tube length longer at the same time. So I need to jump in here real quick and say, also the reason that I'm approaching things this way is because those of you out there that scored really well on the last video's bike fit test, you had longer reaches, shorter inseams, so longer torsos, and good athleticism. You're not really going to have much trouble finding bikes that fit or positions that fit, because you'll be able to tolerate the longer reaches and the lower bar positions. You'll even have more leeway in choosing the right size bike. You can actually get it wrong a little bit, and while it might not be perfect, you'll still be able to ride it without terrible discomfort. But the people out there who are more fit challenged, they have longer inseams, so shorter torsos, shorter reaches, more limited athleticism. They'll have more limitations on their positions that are comfortable and powerful to them. And not only that, they'll also have a much more narrow margin of error when it comes to choosing the right size bike. So I'm addressing the more common scenarios and the more common situations that will arise with the more fit challenged people. You fortunate ones with really good test scores, some of this likely won't apply to you, but it still might help out in some aspects of your bike fit. Now, often deciding between two sizes of bike comes down to taking a look at the two cardinal measurements we look at for that effective top tube length and head tube length, and deciding how far each of the sizes falls from your ideal measurements, or what would be your ideal measurements. Now, how do we come up with the ideal measurements? Well, in a perfect world, a bike fit or a skilled bike fitter would provide you with those. But again, if you're here, that's probably not what's in the cards for you right now. But again, a good place to start is that old video I mentioned that helps you correlate from your old bike and helps you make decisions about the new bike. It can often get you very close to at least a mild range of what you're looking for effective top tube and head tube length. So then it just simply becomes a game of lining up your ideal numbers between where these sizes fall. And this is where the gap or the difference between the two sizes becomes critical. The bigger the differential between, say, a small and a medium in a given size, then the more critical this becomes. If that gap is pretty big, if it's a pretty wide chasm between the medium and the large or whatever, it's a much bigger deal that you make the right decision and choose the right frame. Now, if you line up the numbers and your ideal numbers for head tube length and effective top tube both are closer to one of the sizes, let's say they're both pretty close to the medium, and they're much further away then from the large, let's say you're choosing between the medium and the large in this case, then it makes your decision fairly easy. If you're married to that bike and that's what it's between those two sizes, then, you know, the medium is almost definitely going to be the safe bet for you. But truly, what's more common is we have one ideal measurement. So the effective top tube will be closer to one of the sizes and the head tube length will be closer to the other size. And this is where it gets tricky. Okay, so for instance, let's say through your best reasoning, you determine that your ideal effective top tube is somewhere around like 53.2, low 53s. Let's say we give it a range. We give you some room to play with. So it's between 53.0 and 53.5 or so. But somewhere right in the middle there would be ideal. And your ideal head tube length is like in the tall 15 centimeter range, 15.7, 15.8, let's say, you know, as close to 16 as you could get. Maybe that's what you determine. And you're looking at the Trek Domane SL disc. As you can see from the geometry of those, you're going to be much closer to the effective top tube of the 52, but you're much closer to the head tube of the 54. So now the big question is, now what do you do? Well, essentially what we need to do is we need to make some determinations of kind of which measurement is more important to us. But I'm going to try and keep it even simpler than that. So we're going to go back to our tests that we did on our body. And again, this is very generalized. But if your flexibility is really good, then, and your athleticism is very high, then you might be able to relent a little bit on the head tube length. Because you might be able to tolerate if your head tube is a half a centimeter or your bar height is a half a centimeter or a centimeter lower, perhaps. And this is especially in the case where your reach is average or below average and your inseam length is maybe a little bit above average and so which means your torso is shorter too. And I would say that this is probably one of the rare occasions where you might make a decision based on the head tube length as the primary measurement. That's, I think, more rare. It's usually a better bet. It's usually a safer bet to use the effective top tube as your starting point. Here's another one. In general, it's easier to fit a bike that's even moderately too small than one that's even a little bit too big. So in a lot of these cases, if let's say you're smack dab in the middle between two sizes, it seems like much of the time, the smaller size is going to provide you with fewer compromises down the road. Now, why is this? Well, in my experience, taking a small bike and pushing the saddle back and putting a longer stem on it, which will effectively it'll take your weight and drape it over the bike more, has significantly fewer negative effects on handling than when you try and cram the saddle forward and shorten the stem and you're trying to then shove all your weight into the middle of the frame. So I would say if there was one large general rule to follow, again, relying on that smaller frame is usually the safer bet. So now you have a lot of tools at your disposal. You've done the physical test on you to find out about how, what your reach is like, etc. You have taken a look at that old video, so now you kind of have an idea of what your ideal measurements are. You know how to look up different measurements from other bikes and where you fall between sizes, and it should really do a pretty decent job of helping you narrow down with a reasonable amount of confidence which bike is going to work best for you. So I know there's a lot there, and now we're talking about working with 3 videos at once and going through things. But let me know how this goes, if you find it helpful, and perhaps how we can add to it and make it even better. So thanks everybody. I will see you in a couple of days.